20 years. That was how long I was called the useless one inside my own home. I grew up at parties where only my sister's name was celebrated, inside family photos where I was just a shadow cropped at the edge. The day I turned 16, my father shouted straight into my face, "You'll be nothing without this family." I left that night with $200 in my backpack and one promise to myself, to prove them wrong. From empty hands and thousands of sleepless nights, today I'm telling this story from the very estate in Napa Valley I built with my own strength. And then, life turned full circle. One afternoon, an old silver car stopped at the gate. My parents and sister stepped out, no longer shining, only carrying arrogance and expectation. They came to claim a share of what they had never given me. I smiled, holding an envelope I had already prepared, and the whole room fell silent when they opened it. If it were you, what would you do when the past that once despised you suddenly knocks on your door, demanding a share of the success you built with your own hands? And where are you listening to this story from? Share it so I know we are not alone. My name is Amelia Harper. I was born and raised in San Francisco, a city both dazzling and unforgiving, with hills rolling under lights like waves, rows of candy-colored houses in outer sunset, and windows casting a soft golden glow that as a child I thought was happiness. Our house stood on a windy street where in the afternoons you could hear the fog roll in, howling like a ship's horn, the roof tiles always damp with a thin layer of mist. Inside, there was an electric fireplace and a family portrait hanging by the entrance. 3 people smiling brightly, while I stood slightly off to the side of the frame, eyes looking somewhere beyond the camera. We were the kind of struggling middle-class family that had enough money for my mother, Linda, to change the curtains each season and place architecture magazines on the coffee table, but were constantly tense over credit card debt and the endless lessons for Charlotte, their shining star. The air in the house always felt like it was covered by an invisible sheet of glass, glossy, fine, proper, but cold to the touch. Robert, my father, had just lost his 3rd job in 2 years at that time. He had been an insurance salesman, then switched to real estate right as the dot-com bubble burst, and after that, jumped into an office equipment company promising unlimited commissions. Each time he failed, he came home with a new suit and a new vow. This week I'll close 2 deals. Then on some random night, with the smell of beer mixing with the plastic scent of the sofa and the sound of a 49ers game flooding the living room, his voice would harden. In this house, everyone has to bring value. That line seemed to glide past my mother and Charlotte but stop right in front of me like a sentence being handed down. When contracts didn't come through, his anger needed somewhere to land, and I, the quiet, small-frame daughter with no dance recitals or model tryouts on the calendar, was the easiest target. He never smashed furniture, never screamed loud enough for neighbors to knock. He was simply cold and steady. Words pressed out like weights, contemptuous glances, long evenings where my name was never spoken. Linda was different. She didn't like confrontation. She preferred Christmas photos in matching sweaters, red for everyone, a tree that looked like it stepped out of a magazine, everything pressed under the label of perfect. She kept a calendar of things that need to happen so we look like a good family. Charlotte taking 3 ballet classes, having an SAT tutor, joining the drama club and cheer team. While I was supposed to keep the house tidy, not distract Charlotte, not create drama when guests are here. When I asked to join a Saturday art class at the community center, she glanced at me and gave a thin smile. "Honey, that's not really your thing. Besides, Charlotte needs to get to her catwalk practice." The rejection didn't need to be shouted, it came through her eyes, through other people's busy schedules layered over my small wants, through the endless maybe next times that never arrived. Charlotte was the sun around which every schedule revolved. On the day she won an award at the spring recital, Mom carried a handmade bouquet the size of a cabbage, Dad clicked the camera nonstop, and I stood off to the side holding a cupcake I had baked myself, waiting for someone to turn and notice. When she needed her own room to focus on her career, my bed was moved to the corner of the living room, hidden behind a flimsy bamboo screen. When she needed the car for castings, I walked home through the soaked fog after school, the back of my shirt freezing as the ocean wind slid down my collar. No one had to tell me I didn't matter, their schedules said it all. Some memories cut into me like the edge of paper. On my 13th birthday, I woke up early to blow up blue balloons, tying them in a bundle with fishing line I found in a drawer. I baked a small banana bread, stuck 3 candles on top, and scrawled the letter A in shaky whipped cream. That evening, Charlotte got a call from a modeling agency inviting her to a party with a big photographer. Mom slipped a dress onto her, Dad stood by the door with car keys in hand, and I sat by the table as the candles melted into puddles of wax. When they returned, Mom said, "Oh gosh, I'm exhausted. Let's make it up to you tomorrow, okay?" The next morning was Monday, then a math test, then another endless string of busy. The banana bread dried out, the balloon sagged, and I cleaned it all up myself like sweeping away a foolish dream. In 8th grade, I won 2nd place at the school science fair with a project on gut bacteria and immunity, something I had read about in the library. I carried the certificate home, imagining it taped to the fridge beside pictures of Charlotte in her sequined costumes. Dad glanced at it, waved dismissively. "Second doesn't mean anything. Come back when it's first." Mom said, "That's nice," but placed the certificate on the corner of the table and quickly pulled out a photo of Charlotte with her dance coach to put in the center. Quietly, I took some tape and stuck my certificate on the inside of the living room cabinet door where only I would see it when I changed the bed sheets. That Christmas, I carefully folded a paper crane from silver foil, stitched a thin ribbon through it, and wrote on the wing, "Wishing the family peace." I also knitted a gray wool scarf, the stitches uneven because I had learned from free videos at the library. I packed them into a shoebox, wrapped it with pages from the Sunday Chronicle to save money on wrapping paper. On Christmas morning, Charlotte tore open her gift and instant camera her squeals of excitement making the chandelier tremble. My parents opened the box I handed them, stayed silent for 3 seconds, then gave an awkward laugh. How cute. That afternoon, while I was taking out the trash, I saw the paper crane mixed with the wrapping scraps, one wing crushed, and the scarf draped over a chair, disappearing a few days later. No one mentioned it again. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they chose to forget. Emotional abandonment leaves no smashed doors, no profanities, no bruises anyone can see. It lives in dinners where everyone talks about Charlotte and her plans while I sit filling my plate with green beans, learning to swallow back sentences that start with, "I want." It lives in parent-teacher meetings where my mother shakes hands with the principal and fixes Charlotte's hair in the lobby mirror while I stand waiting, my scholarship form denied for lack of a parental signature still tucked into a folder. It lives in the kitchen at 5 o'clock, sunset bouncing off the stainless steel fridge, where my father asks, "What useful thing did you do today?" And I answer by scrubbing an extra pan. I often went to the public library on Judah Street, where the smell of old paper made you forget the sound of the wind. There, I read everything. Beginners' books on immunology, stories about science and hospitals, a few short pieces about girls trying to survive in loud families. The librarian, Miss Patel, with her warm Indian accent, sometimes handed me old issues of National Geographic. She said, "You have the eyes of someone who asks the right questions." I looked up and felt seen, not as a moving shadow between the kitchen and the laundry machine anymore. In a world where my mother only cared about perfect family photos and my father only about value brought home, the library was the one place where no one measured me against Charlotte's yardstick. One day, I made a small card, drawn in ballpoint pen, and wrote, "I'm proud of our family because we always try." I placed it on the dining table. That evening, Dad came home late, sighed, turned on the TV, and brushed the card off the table. It landed on the floor, smeared with spaghetti sauce, then disappeared into the trash. I pretended not to see it, but in my head the sound of paper being crumpled was deafening. It was the same as when Mom handed me the list of chores for Christmas photo day: clean the windows, polish the cabinet handles, iron the tablecloth. There was no line that said, "Amelia gets to have one photo of her own." Once I asked Mom, Can I join the science team? They meet after school. She didn't look up from her perfect Thanksgiving dinner menu notes and said, "No, you have to pick Charlotte up at the studio at 5:30. I walked to the Muni streetcar stop and stood watching the trains glide by like silver fish, wondering if anyone would notice if I disappeared. I started wearing my headphones tight, listening to radio waves mixed with my heartbeat, teaching myself to talk inside my head to fill the empty spaces. I began to think maybe people are born with a place in the house, and mine was like the coat hook behind the door used when needed, unseen when not. One evening, Dad was frustrated because a client had backed out after promising a deal. He looked at me longer than usual. "Daughter," he said, "don't become a burden. Without this family, you're nothing." That sentence felt like a nail hammered into the wall right next to where I slept, creaking every night when the wind blew. Mom still set dinner beautifully, Charlotte still rehearsed in the bedroom that had become her studio, and I learned how to do everything without making noise, washing dishes with a softer touch, closing doors slowly, breathing quieter. Making other people comfortable was the only value I had in that house. At school, when they handed out parent invitation slips for the student recognition ceremony, I slipped the paper into my backpack, knowing that if I gave it to them, Mom would say it clashes with the dress rehearsal, and Dad would snort, "Not worth anything." I still went to the ceremony, standing in the very back, hearing Charlotte's polished name announced for the Artistic Contribution Award, watching her step onto the stage in applause and camera flashes. The family photo printed on that year's Christmas card didn't have me in it. I was the one holding the camera. I don't share these things to ask for pity. I say them because in America, emotional neglect is wrapped in glossy paper. Dinners that look complete, holiday photos that scream family goals, words like "we're fine," but the child learns to read the silence between the lines. And I read that silence very clearly. It was the cold draft slipping through the door frame on foggy nights. It was the neighbor's porch light feeling warmer than ours. It was the sensation of standing inside the house but feeling like I was out on the porch, listening to people talk about someone else's future. When the adults in my house called me useless, they didn't need to shout. They only had to forget to blow out candles with me, leave a second-place ribbon to yellow in a drawer, or casually toss a paper crane into the trash. Over time, I learned that silence is also a way of naming. And they named me that way for years, until one rainy night at the bus stop, I promised myself I would change it with my own hands. That night, San Francisco rain poured down like a waterfall, streams of water lashing the windows with a cold hiss. I remember sitting in the living room, having just finished a science assignment, silently hoping for at least one word of praise. Charlotte came back from a casting, bragging about making it to a test shoot. Mom sighed as if heaven itself had dropped the blessing, and Dad raised his beer in celebration. I placed my printed paper on the table and began. I was just selected to join the statewide science research competition. But before I could finish, Robert slammed his beer can down on the table. The crash, drowning out my voice. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot from alcohol and failure, and roared, "You think that stuff matters? Charlotte is the future. And you?" He paused for a beat, then said the sentence I would never forget for the rest of my life. "You'll be nothing without this family." I am. It felt like my heart exploded. All the times I'd been called useless, all the forgotten birthdays, the paper cranes tossed away, the nights I studied alone under a desk lamp came flooding back. But this time it wasn't a quiet cut, it was a knife driven straight in. I shot to my feet, tears burning at the corners of my eyes, but my voice suddenly clear and steady. "Then let's see what I am without this family." The whole room froze. Charlotte curled her lip. Mom drew in a breath as if to speak, but stayed silent. Dad stared at me like I was both rebellious and pathetic. I didn't wait another second. I ran to my room, pulled my old backpack from under the bed, and stuffed in a few changes of clothes, the gray sweater I had knitted myself, my notebook, and the $200 I had hidden in a shoebox money saved from odd jobs at the corner grocery store. My hands trembled as I zipped it up, my heart pounding like a drum. Outside, the rain lashed against the window frame, either cheering me on or warning me I was stepping into something uncertain. I walked through the living room, and no one stopped me. Mom only lifted her eyes, then turned away, as if this was a scene she had already played out in her mind, the surplus daughter finally leaving. Dad gave a thin, contemptuous smile but said nothing more. The door closed behind me, and the hiss of wind and rain instantly swallowed the sounds of the house. I stepped quickly onto the soaked street, cars passing by splashing water everywhere. The pale yellow glow of the streetlights reflected my trembling shadow, small but stubborn. I had no clear plan, only the knowledge that I needed to go, as far as I could. My cheap sneakers were drenched and freezing, but I kept walking. I thought of Miss Patel at the library, of the books on medicine and technology, of a world out there where people would look at what I did, not at the name someone had given me. Eventually, I stopped at the bus stop near Market Street, where neon light from the Mexican diner across the road shimmered through the rain. The hard plastic bench was icy against my back. I pulled my backpack close, hugging it as if it were everything I had in the world, and it was. Rain blew in through the gaps in the shelter. My hair was soaked, but I sat still, eyes following each bus as it slid past, license plates blurring in the curtain of water. In that moment, I felt small to the point of vanishing, like a grain of sand lost in a desert, but inside my chest a strange fire flared. I remember whispering it out loud, almost under my breath, but clear enough to hear myself. I will prove them wrong. The 3 words, prove them wrong, echoed in my head like a spell. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know how long $200 would last, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never let myself go back to being the silent shadow in that house. I would become something they never imagined. That rainy night, I left San Francisco on a night bus with no destination clearer than Oakland, where the rent was cheaper and no one knew who I was. I rented a space in a run-down dorm for students and low-wage workers, walls peeling, cockroaches sometimes darting across the sink. The bunk bed creaked every time I turned over, and rap music from the next room thumped late into the night. But it was the first time I slept in a space where no one spoke the word useless. There, I was just a young woman with a backpack and a blurry dream. I quickly found a job at a small coffee shop in downtown Oakland. Every morning, I put on a worn brown apron, stood behind the counter pulling espresso shots, wiping tables, and memorizing the polite smile for customers. The work was exhausting, my back aching after each 8-hour shift, but every time I held a few small tip bills in my hand, I felt a flicker of control over my life. I saved every dollar, lived on instant noodles and discounted bread, and scraped together enough for cheap community college classes. The most luxurious thing I allowed myself back then was a used laptop from a second-hand shop. It was slow, the fan whirred loudly, but when my fingers touched the keyboard, it felt like the whole world opened. From that laptop, I began exploring programming. I searched for free courses online, from basic HTML to Python, then Java. At first, everything was incomprehensible, lines of code looking like an alien language. I typed and retyped, ran tests, failed, the screen flashing red error messages. Some nights I was so exhausted I fell asleep right at the table, but in the morning I would power it back on and try again. Strangely, every time a piece of code finally ran, even just printing "Hello World," my heart leapt. For the first time, I had something that belonged entirely to me, something no one could throw away, something no one could call useless. Then one day, I stumbled across an article about using artificial intelligence in medicine, a small project at Stanford experimenting with AI to detect lung cancer early through X-ray images. I read it hungrily, feeling as if my heart were being pulled toward a beam of light. I remembered those afternoons in the library reading about immunology, the health posters taped on my high school walls. A thought flared inside me. If technology can save lives, maybe I can find meaning for my own existence. That night, I barely slept, scrolling through dozens of research papers, coder forums, and free machine learning tutorials. I knew I had just found something not only to live on, but to live for. At the cafe, some of my coworkers mocked me. Amelia, you think you're going to be some tech genius? That stuff's for rich kids at Stanford, one of the baristas sneered when he saw me typing on my laptop during break. I just smiled, swallowing the sting in my chest. I was used to being underestimated, and this time, I swore I wouldn't let anyone's contempt extinguish the small light that had just begun to glow inside me. A turning point came when I enrolled in an introductory computer science class at the community college. The professor, Mr. Sanders, a kind man with silver hair, often noticed me sitting in the front row, taking meticulous notes. After the final class of the semester, he asked me to stay behind. "You pick this up quickly," he said. "Have you ever thought about applying for a scholarship to a major university?" My heart raced as I shook my head. To me, UC Berkeley, Stanford, or MIT were just names I read in newspapers. But Mr. Sanders didn't laugh. Instead, he handed me a sheet of paper with information about a scholarship program for students from difficult backgrounds. "You have talent. You should try." I applied with trembling hands, attaching an essay about why I wanted to pursue medical technology. I wrote about those rainy nights at the bus stop, about the feeling of being overlooked, and about my wish to build tools that would ensure invisible kids like me would never be abandoned again, at least not in healthcare. A month later, an email arrived from UC Berkeley. "Congratulations. You have been awarded a scholarship." I sat frozen in front of the screen, tears streaming down onto the keyboard. For the first time in my life, a great door had opened before me, not because of family, not because of luck, but because of my own effort. Stepping onto the campus of UC Berkeley felt like entering another world. Towering red brick buildings, vast lecture halls filled with students from every corner of the globe, and research groups buzzing with energy late into the night. I was no longer the invisible girl cropped out of the Christmas photo. I was a proud student at one of the top universities in America. Even though I still had to work part-time to make ends meet, even though the weight of the future still pressed on me, something new stirred inside, the belief that I could create value no one could deny. From a child once called useless, I was now rewriting the story of my life. And that was the first turning point, the moment I realized that every difficult beginning can become the foundation for a great journey if you are persistent enough not to give up. Graduating from UC Berkeley is one of the moments etched in my memory forever, not because my parents or sister showed up for a photo, but because for the first time, I walked onto a stage and received a degree with honors, carrying the conviction that I truly mattered. In the crowd, I spotted Mr. Sanders, the professor who had believed in me and helped me find that scholarship waving. He was the first family I had ever chosen for myself. I knew the road ahead was still long, but it was no longer a road in the dark. I had found my light. Right after graduation, I was offered a job at a small startup in Silicon Valley focused on medical technology. The company had fewer than 20 employees, crammed into a rented office in Palo Alto with worn-out furniture and a coffee machine running around the clock. But to me, it felt like a promised land. I threw myself into the work relentlessly, spending days and nights tinkering with ways to apply AI to medical diagnostics. I was captivated by every line of code, every dataset of patient records, every machine learning algorithm that could analyze X-ray images. Some nights, when all my colleagues had gone home, I would still be there alone, the glow of the monitor lighting my face, feeling as if I held the key to opening a whole new door in medicine. On one project, I joined a research team focused on early detection of pancreatic cancer, a disease often called the silent killer. I remember one moment when the AI system we were testing identified a tiny tumor that doctors had missed with the Sayensight daughter's naked eye. I trembled so hard I had to place my hand on the table to steady myself. In that instant, I knew every sleepless night, every rushed dinner of instant noodles in the office had been worth it. I was helping to save innocent lives, and that was the most powerful feeling I had ever known. But bringing research out of the lab and into the real world required more than passion. We needed funding, vision, and grit. When the startup ran out of money, many colleagues left to find safer opportunities. I chose the opposite, to step out of my comfort zone. I gathered all my small savings and took the risk of pitching to an angel investor about my idea. That first presentation before a room of wealthy investors made cold sweat drip down my back. I stood there with nothing but a laptop, a few rough slides, and an unshakable belief that this technology could save lives. I spoke with my whole heart, not just logic. If we can detect earlier, a child won't have to grow up without their mother, a father won't have to bury his child too soon. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then one person nodded, then another. And finally, a handshake that changed my life. I received seed funding to start my own company. Vital AI was born in a tiny rented office in Mountain View. On the first day, it was just me and 3 young engineers sitting on old swivel chairs, writing out the company's vision. Using artificial intelligence to bring precision healthcare to communities, regardless of wealth. I wanted technology not just for large hospitals or patients with premium insurance, but for small clinics where working-class families often went. We worked day and night, coding until dawn, eating cold pizza off the conference table, and bursting into laughter whenever the system successfully recognized a new type of lesion. In just 3 years, Vital AI grew at lightning speed. We signed contracts with major hospitals across California, then expanded throughout the United States. The media began to call me a young female CEO with huge potential in health technology. My name appeared in Forbes, and I was invited to TED conferences to speak about the future of AI in medicine. But every time I stood on a stage, I thought of the little girl once left behind in a cold house in San Francisco, of the forgotten banana bread birthday cake, of my father's words shouted in my face, "You'll be nothing without this family." And I smiled, because I knew I had proven the opposite. More important than recognition was the family I chose for myself. Maya, my best friend from my days at the cafe, became Vital AI's Chief Human Resources Officer. She believed in people more than numbers, and thanks to her, our company stayed warm and human even as we expanded to hundreds of employees. Carlos, an AI engineer from Mexico and my old classmate at Berkeley, stood by me from the beginning. He called me Hermana, sister, and for the first time, I heard that word without feeling pain. Slowly, a circle of people formed around me, people who trusted, shared, and lifted one another up. We held small parties after work, eating tacos right in the office, sharing childhood stories, wounds, and dreams. In that space, no one called me useless. They called me the guide, the big sister, and sometimes simply Amelia, a person seen for who she truly was. With them, I didn't have to prove anything. I just had to exist, and that was enough. While my blood family had never once asked me about my dreams, the family I chose lifted me up after every setback. That contrast made me realize something profound. Blood alone does not create a family love and trust do. With Vital AI, I hadn't just built a company, I had built the kind of home I'd never known. The climb had never been easy, but it transformed me from a girl dismissed as worthless into one of the most notable young faces in Silicon Valley. More importantly, it helped me find my real family, the people I chose. In that family, I was no longer a shadow but fully myself, Amelia Harper. As Vital AI began appearing in major news outlets and I was invited again and again to speak at technology conferences, it felt as though my life had turned a new page, closing the door on all the painful chapters behind me. But the past doesn't disappear so easily. It lies quietly somewhere, waiting for the smallest chance to rise again. And that chance came in the form of a text message from a phone number I had tried hard to forget. One evening, after wrapping up a meeting with our engineering team about a new blood cancer diagnostic prototype, I leaned back in my chair and opened my phone to scroll through notifications. Among the flood of work emails and LinkedIn requests, I saw a message from a familiar number, one that hadn't appeared on my screen for more than 10 years. "Amelia, it's me, Charlotte." My heart stopped for a beat. I hadn't heard that name from the person herself in over a decade. The message was long, but I read it in one breath. "Amelia, I'm in trouble. The modeling career isn't like before, I'm not getting any shows, and I'm behind on rent. I know you're successful now, with a company and money. Can you lend me some? I'll pay you back, someday. I sat frozen. Memories rushed back. The room I'd been pushed out of, the forgotten birthday cake, her curled lip when I tried to tell them about my science award. It all felt like yesterday. I set the phone down and stepped out onto the balcony, inhaling deeply. I had promised myself I wouldn't let old wounds shake the life I'd built. But a part of me had still hoped that someday my family would reach out not for money, but for acknowledgement. And with Charlotte's message, that small hope was crushed instantly. They hadn't changed. They only came when they were empty. I returned to my desk and typed a short reply. I'm sorry, I can't help. I hit send, my heart pounding, but inside I felt strangely lighter. I thought it was over. But a few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. The new message made me go still. You're just lucky, that's all. In my eyes, you're still useless. Don't think a little success makes you forget who you are. I stared at the screen. The word useless was like a blade slipping through the armor I'd built all these years. I thought I had left the past behind, but it turned out one sentence was enough to make the wound bleed again. I leaned back in my chair, eyes shut tight. Outside, rain beat against the office window like a drum in my head. Part of me wanted to scream, to fire back with every achievement I had earned, to prove I wasn't useless. But another part whispered, why prove anything to someone who never wanted to see? That night, I barely slept. I sat alone in the office, the computer screen casting its glow across my face. On the screen were unfinished lines of code, medical data from the community hospitals we were partnering with. I stared at each number, each graph, and suddenly wondered, maybe this was the real answer. Not arguing, not trading words, but the work I was doing, the lives my technology might save. Charlotte could call me useless, but what about the patients who had been diagnosed early and given years more to live? They would never call me that. The next morning, I arrived at the lab earlier than usual. I poured every ounce of energy into the project in front of me, developing an AI algorithm to help frontline doctors detect blood cancers early through a simple blood test. My team and I worked for weeks, hardly leaving the lab. Every time I felt exhausted, I remembered that message. Every time someone on the team grew discouraged, I told them my story about being called useless, about how I wanted to turn that label into fuel. The whole team drew strength from it. When our first prototype correctly identified a case a physician had missed, the lab erupted in cheers. I stood there, tears brimming, thinking of Charlotte's words. Useless? If this was useless, then I was willing to bring this uselessness to millions of people. I never replied to Charlotte's second message. I left it sitting in my phone, a reminder that the past never fully disappears, but we can choose how we respond to it. I had chosen not to give it the power to destroy me anymore. Instead, I turned it into fuel. That evening, when Maya stopped by the office and found me still at my desk, she set a hot cup of coffee in front of me and asked, Amelia, why have you been working so hard lately? I smiled, lifted the cup, and whispered softly, because someone once called me useless, and I have to prove them wrong not with words, but with my life. Maya didn't press further. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. In that moment, I realized I was no longer alone. I had a new family, a chosen family, people who didn't need me to prove anything, yet still cheered me on to become the best version of myself. With them, and with the patients out there, I knew the label useless had finally lost its weight. The past may return, but this time, I had learned how to turn it into fuel. And I also knew that sooner or later, Charlotte and my parents would come to me not just through messages, but in person. And when that day arrived, I would be ready. That day came sooner than I expected. After Charlotte's message, I had already braced myself for their eventual arrival. But when I saw the old silver sedan pull up at the gates of my Napa Valley estate, a shock still rippled through my body. This wasn't lifeless words on a phone screen anymore. This was the past in flesh and bone, stepping out of the car, carrying the same mix of arrogance and defeat I remembered too well. Robert stepped out first. His frame was more stooped than before, his hair streaked with gray, but his voice still carried that commanding tone that had once made me hold my breath as a child. "Amelia," he barked, as though the grand gates of this estate were naturally his to pass through. Linda followed, her old coat looking years past its prime, though she still tried to shape that gentle, artificial smile, the same one she had always used to cover the cracks in our family. And then Charlotte, wearing an expensive but faded dress, her face painted heavily to mask the exhaustion, stepped out, her eyes carrying both arrogance and a quiet plea. I stood on the steps, the small envelope I had prepared still in my hand, and offered them a cold smile. They walked closer, their eyes sweeping across the wealth around them like surveyors sizing up a treasure. Robert wasted no time with pleasantries. His voice came out gravelly. "You only got this far because of the foundation the family gave you. Don't forget, we're blood, you have a responsibility to share with your family." Linda jumped in immediately, her tone shaky but dripping with theatrics. "Amelia, I've missed you so much. Our family may have had misunderstandings, but I believe we can heal. You have so much. Would it hurt to share a little with your family? I don't want money, I just want my daughter back." I heard every word, every tremor of false tenderness, and felt my stomach knot. Charlotte stood slightly behind them, arms crossed, her gaze flicking around the mansion before she spoke bluntly. "You own Vital AI, right? You didn't build it all alone. Since childhood, without mom and dad taking care of you, you wouldn't have gotten an education. You should give me a share of the company just to make things fair." I almost laughed. Fair? The word rang in my mind like a cruel joke. They had forgotten my birthdays, stolen my bed, thrown away the gifts I made with my whole heart. And now, they dared to stand in front of me demanding fairness. I drew a long breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "If you want to talk, come inside." I turned and walked into the living room, signaling the security staff to open the gates but still keeping them on alert. Robert strode in like he owned the place, Linda's eyes darted around as if cataloging every detail, and Charlotte flopped onto the white sofa, crossing her legs, twirling her phone in her hand, feigning nonchalance. The living room carried a faint scent of oak and wine. Modern art hung neatly on the walls, and warm golden light bathed the space. Yet the atmosphere had thickened, like a storm cloud pressing down. I sat across from them, back straight, the envelope resting on the table. Inside me, anger churned like molten lava under a volcanic crust. I studied their faces, every wrinkle, every familiar frown, and saw reflected back an entire childhood of abandonment. Robert tapped his fingers against the glass table, trying to sound authoritative. "Amelia, you can't just dismiss us. Who do you think gave you everything? It's this bloodline. Now that you're wealthy, you have a responsibility. That's the law of family." 1. Linda clasped her hands, her eyes glistening with staged tears. "I've missed you so many nights, Amelia. Our family made mistakes, but the love is still here. Can you really turn your back on your aging parents?" Charlotte leaned back on the sofa, a faint smirk on her lips. "You don't have to give much. 15, maybe 20% of the shares. You have more than enough, why keep it all? Share it, like a real family would." Molly. I listened without interrupting, letting them reveal themselves. But with each word, each look, the old wounds inside me began to bleed again. Outside, the wind swept through the vineyard, making the leaves rustle like whispers. Inside, the air grew so heavy I could hear the pounding of my own heartbeat. I smiled, but within me, a fire had already ignited, ready to erupt. In that moment, I understood. 20 years had changed nothing. They hadn't come for me, they had come for money. Not to apologize, but to demand. Not to acknowledge me, but to keep imposing their will. And I knew then that the true confrontation had begun. I lifted the envelope, resting it lightly in my palm, and looked straight at the three of them. My voice dropped low, calm to the point that even I was surprised. "If this is the reason you came, then I have something for you." Their eyes lit up, convinced that inside was $1 million check. But they had no idea this envelope didn't hold money, it held the truth they had spent years trying to erase. and it would be the final blow. Inside me, anger was no longer a storm spinning out of control. It had become something else, a steady current, silent but powerful. For the first time, I knew I was no longer the girl sitting quietly at a bus stop years ago. I was the woman who would redefine family on her own terms. In that moment, the Napa Valley living room became the stage for the greatest confrontation of my life. I sat tall in my chair, spine straight, my eyes fixed on those familiar yet foreign faces. Robert drummed his fingers on the table, Linda dabbed the corner of her eyes with a tissue, Charlotte pretended to be composed though her lips pressed tight. I placed the white envelope on the glass surface, my fingertip tapping a steady rhythm as if to keep my rage contained. "Before you open this," I said evenly, "I want to tell you a few things I never had the chance to say in the past 20 years. The room sank into silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock marked the passing seconds. I drew a deep breath, then began. "Do you remember my 13th birthday? The day I sat alone with a small banana bread cake, 3 candles burning down to stubs, then cleaned everything up myself while you took Charlotte to her party. I waited all night for one birthday wish, but no one remembered. That was the first time I realized that in this family, I was nothing more than a shadow." Linda lowered her head, her lips moving as if to speak, but I didn't let her cut in. "Or the day I won second place at the science fair. I brought that certificate home, set it on the table with all the pride I had. But Dad waved it off, said, 'Second doesn't mean anything.' And Mom moved the paper aside to make room for another photo of Charlotte. I learned to hide my achievements because no one cared." Robert's brow furrowed, his mouth opening, but I locked eyes with him, my voice rising a notch. "Don't deny it. I remember every crease of your frown. And Charlotte," I turned to my sister, my gaze like a blade. "Do you remember the Christmas when I folded paper cranes, wrote blessings on the wings, and knitted scarves for everyone? You were the first one to throw it in the trash. I saw everything. You smiled, said, 'How cute,' and an hour later, my gift was in the garbage. You didn't just throw away the present, you threw away my heart." Charlotte burst into tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks, but I didn't stop. "And Dad, do you remember the rainy night when I was 16? You shouted in my face, 'You'll be nothing without this family.' That was the night I left with $200 in a backpack. I sat at a bus stop, freezing and trembling, but I swore I would prove you wrong. And today, do you see it now?" The room was so silent I could hear the ragged breathing of each person. I placed my hand on the envelope and slid it toward them. "Inside are all the answers you're looking for. But I warn you, it's not what you imagine." Robert snatched it up, tearing it open with eager hands. I watched the exact moment his expression froze as he read the first letter. I had written it neatly, only a few lines. "I have turned the uselessness you branded me with into strength. Every insult, every act of forgetting, every contemptuous glance, all of it became the fuel that brought me here today. I don't need your approval. And I will never allow any of you to diminish me again. Ah." Linda's hands trembled as she picked up the second sheet, a long list of charitable donations. I had established multiple funds to support poor cancer patients, scholarships for medical students, even donations made in the name of the Harper family. I hadn't done it to honor them, but to show them. The name they once considered meaningless now stood for the survival of hundreds of people. "You never knew," I had written, "but every time a patient is saved by my technology, the name Harper is spoken not with contempt, but with gratitude." Charlotte's fingers shook as she drew out the last item. A check for $10,000. I had written a single line beside it. "Child, rearing costs. Not a penny more." The room erupted into a deafening silence. Robert's face flushed red, his hand crushing the check until it wrinkled. He roared, "10,000? After everything we gave you? You think this is enough? You owe this family far more." I met his eyes, my voice calm enough to chill the air. "I owe you nothing. In fact, it's you who owe me my childhood, my affection, my chance to live like a normal child. I'm not asking for it back. I'm only giving exactly what you gave me, no more, no less. Linda dropped her tissue, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, Amelia, I just want to mend things. I've missed you so much. Can't you give us a chance? I cut her off, my voice firm, unyielding. The chance to mend passed a long time ago. It passed with every birthday candle you forgot to blow out with me, with every time you turned your back when I needed an embrace. I have healed myself, and now I don't need a counterfeit version of reconciliation. I won. Charlotte began to sob, her mascara streaking, her voice breaking. You've made it. You're successful now. Can't you give me a chance? I was wrong. I was jealous. But you don't need to keep it all. Just give me a share. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with an icy stillness. Don't you understand? I built this company with sleepless nights, with tears, with perseverance, and you only ever knew how to take. I gave you too many chances in the past, chances to be loved more than me, chances to be prioritized in everything. Those chances are over. Robert shot to his feet, rage shaking the table. You're ungrateful. Without us, you wouldn't even exist. You dare turn your back on your own blood? I rose too, meeting his eyes, my voice low but cutting clear. No. It was you who turned your back on me first. And today, I'm only doing what you taught me, turning my back on those who never valued me. I turned to the security staff waiting by the door. Please escort them out. My tone was calm, but my body felt as though it had just cast off a burden I had carried for decades. Robert snarled with fury, Linda sobbed and begged, Charlotte stammered out, please forgive me, but I didn't waver. They were led outside, the great door shut behind them, the lock clicked with a dry snap. I stood still in the living room, eyes on the now empty envelope lying on the table. My heart pounded hard, but inside me, for the first time in years, there was a strange, quiet peace. I whispered to myself, it's over. And in that moment, I understood. I was no longer the invisible child, I was the one who had rewritten my own story. And no one, not even those who once called me useless, could ever take that away. The sound of the heavy door slamming echoed through the stillness of the house. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the footsteps fading down the gravel path, the old engine of the silver sedan starting, then rolling away through the gates. The valley fell back into its natural calm, as if no one had come to disturb it at all. Yet inside me, a storm's aftershock still trembled. I walked slowly out onto the balcony, my feet heavy. Before me stretched endless rows of green vines, rolling away under a sunset slowly surrendering to darkness. Napa Valley looked as perfect and serene as an oil painting. But inside, there was no triumphant joy, no rush of victory I had imagined all these years. I felt neither the thrill of defeating them, nor the satisfaction of proving myself right. I felt only light and empty. Part of me had just lifted the massive stone that had weighed on my chest for 2 decades. I had said everything, returned every wound with truth, and placed a period at the end of years of being dismissed. But at the same time, as I looked over the glittering wine valley, I asked myself, is this what I'd been waiting for? This confrontation, however strong and final, still could not fill the space carved into me in childhood. I placed my hand on the balcony railing, my palm cold against the metal. Memories flickered past like a slow-motion reel. Me at 13, blowing out candles alone. Me at 16, sitting at a bus stop in the pouring rain. Me at 20, hunched over an old laptop in a crumbling dorm room. Each of those images, painful as they were, had been the bricks that built the person I had become. And now, standing strong enough to face them, I realized a harsh truth. No confrontation could ever bring justice to a lost childhood. I lifted my gaze to the sky. The last streaks of daylight burned red, swallowed slowly by the night. A cool breeze swept through, carrying the scent of ripe grapes and damp earth, seeping into the hollow spaces inside me. I closed my eyes, letting the wind soothe me. I knew I had won, but it wasn't a victory of revenge, it was the victory of closure. A soft chime rang from inside the estate, the sound of a message. I stepped back in and glanced at the screen. A short line from Maya, "You okay?" I didn't reply right away. I knew I needed time to sit with this, to untangle the mix of emotions still swirling inside. I simply set the phone back down on the table and sank onto the sofa, the vast room around me suddenly feeling emptier than ever. In that moment, I thought, maybe I still longed for something they could never give me: unconditional love. No matter how humiliating their exit had been, no matter how strong I had become, that absence still existed. But unlike when I was 16, I no longer let that emptiness swallow me whole. I knew I could fill it another way: through my work, through the people I chose as my family, through giving the world what I had never received myself. Night fell and Napa Valley lit up. From the balcony, I could see small lights shimmering in each house among the vineyards. I gave a faint smile, no longer bitter, only quiet. I told myself, they've gone. And I'm still here. That's what matters. Today's victory didn't bring instant joy, but it gave me another gift. Freedom. Freedom from the weight of being called useless, from the fear of rejection, from the hopeless craving for a perfect family. And in realizing that, I knew I had truly stepped into a new chapter of my life. After that evening standing silently on the balcony overlooking the Napa Valley, I realized that victory is not the same as healing. I had escorted them out through the great door of the estate, but inside me, old cuts still bled quietly. I had closed a chapter, but hadn't yet found true peace. And that was when I decided to take one step I had avoided for years: to go into therapy. During the first week, I sat in a softly lit room that smelled faintly of lavender oil. My therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Mitchell, had steady eyes and a warm, low voice. She asked me, "Amelia, what brings you here today?" I hesitated for a few seconds, then said, "I'm successful. I have a company, I have everything." But when I look back, I still feel like that 13-year-old girl waiting to blow out candles alone. I still feel useless, even though everyone out there calls me a genius. Saying those words out loud made me feel both relieved and ashamed. But Dr. Mitchell nodded, as if she had heard thousands of stories like mine. "Success can't replace the recognition you longed for from your parents," she said. "But we can learn to give that to ourselves, without waiting for them." In the sessions that followed, I began to open up the memories I had buried for so long. I told her about the scarf tossed in the trash, about the certificate left to gather dust, about the rainy night I left with $200. I cried more than I expected, but through the tears, I learned something: to forgive myself. Not to forgive my parents or my sister, that felt too far away, but to forgive the girl I used to be, for believing she wasn't worthy, for blaming herself when she was abandoned. I held the 13-year-old me in my mind and whispered, "You're not useless, you were just forgotten. And now I'm here, proving you've always had value." Maya became an important companion in that journey. One afternoon, after I finished a therapy session, she took me by the hand and led me to a children's hospital in San Francisco. "You need to see with your own eyes how your technology is saving lives," Maya said. We walked into the treatment wing, where machines running vital AI software sat in the testing rooms. A young doctor explained, "This system has helped us catch 4 cases of blood cancer early in just 2 months. Without it, these children might not still be here." I went still when I saw a 9-year-old girl darting down the hallway, clutching a balloon, her hair almost completely gone from chemotherapy. Her mother, eyes brimming, said to me, "Because of this technology, my daughter got treatment early. I don't know how to thank you." I knelt and hugged the girl, my heart flooding with a feeling no financial success could ever bring, the sense that my existence truly mattered. That experience pushed me to do more. I thought of myself as a child, the invisible one. I couldn't change my own childhood, but I could change the lives of other children. I created the Unseen Stars Scholarship Fund to support kids who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed at home or at school. The fund didn't just offer scholarships, it organized skills workshops, brought kids into labs, and showed them that their worth wasn't tied to someone else's gaze. At the fund's launch, I said, "I was once called useless. But every child is a star, they just need the right sky to shine. Saying those words felt like sending a message back to the little girl I once was, a late act of healing. Alongside the scholarship, I began writing a memoir. At first, it was only short fragments of childhood memories, pages damp with tears. But gradually I wrote more, not to complain, but to share the journey from being invisible to being seen. I wanted my story to be a mirror for anyone abandoned by their family, to show them their value doesn't depend on anyone's approval. The manuscript grew into a book. A publisher reached out, saying it could become a powerful source of inspiration. I agreed to publish, but in my heart, I knew my true purpose wasn't fame, it was to get this story to the people who needed it most. Each time I picked up the pen, I felt another fragment of my soul stitching itself back together. I wrote about the rainy night I left home, but this time in the voice of an adult who had survived it. I wrote about the forgotten birthday, but ended with an image of myself lighting the candles for me. And when I reached the chapter about confronting my parents in the Napa Valley estate, I didn't write with anger, but with calm, as someone who had closed an old book and opened a new one. Healing didn't arrive in a single day. There were still nights I woke up startled, the words, "You'll be nothing without this family," echoing in my head. But instead of letting it haunt me, I learned to look straight at it and answer, "I am myself, and that is enough." I kept meeting with Dr. Mitchell regularly. I kept joining Maya in volunteer visits to the hospital. I watched the bright eyes of the children who received Unseen Stars scholarships. I received emails from readers saying my story had helped them believe again. All of these things wove themselves into a tapestry of healing. When I stood before the mirror now, I no longer saw the forgotten child. I saw a woman who had learned to forgive herself, who had chosen her own family, who had used old wounds to light the path for others. And I knew my journey of healing wasn't just mine, it had become a gift for anyone who needed to hear, "You were never useless. You simply hadn't been seen yet." If you're sitting in front of a screen listening to my story, I want to tell you something very clearly. Your worth is never defined by how other people see you, not even your own family. I was once called useless. I was once forgotten during the most important moments of my life. But from those wounds, I found the strength to rise and become someone no one expected. If today you feel small, unseen, or unrecognized, remember this: you are not invisible. You are a star, and as long as you keep shining, your sky will come.